Oh, shoot. Ag! I didn't set up my camera. Not have been in it today. I am so sorry, but this will only be a second with the camera. We can. Bah humbug. I say bah humbug. Come on, start. There we go. Ugh, has the everything's so off color. I don't get it. Autofocus. All right, 1 more second, everybody. Sorry about this. All right, whatever. It's fine. Hey everybody, welcome again to another exciting episode of the Crowdsourced Politics News Roundup. I am your host and moderator, Cypher, and today we are going to cover a lot of the news that happened over the last week. It's what we do every Thursday. That's why you come here to join us live on Thursdays, and that's what we are here to deliver to you. So we will be getting started, but we want to make a couple of announcements. First announcement is that we are going under a rebrand. We will no longer be called Crowdsourced Politics. We will be called something else. We have settled on the name, but until the branding is like the images for the brand and everything else is concise and taken care of, we don't want to announce what that name is. So until then, we'll still be called Crowdsourced Politics, but it shouldn't be much longer for the rebrand to take place. Hopefully by the end of the month, we get our image done and everything for y'all to check us out under a new name. It'll be the same kind of content you've been wanting from us that we've been delivering, but it'll be under a new moniker. But there is that. Another thing is that we will also be starting next month, official, 100% official this time, be starting on the Praxis Run. And Praxis Run is a new offering by Crowdsourced Politics where we will interview activists as well as going over the history of activism in order to understand how to put political leanings, ideology, and stuff into practice, or otherwise known as praxis. We will interview people from both the political left and the political right in the United States and try to cover a broad swath of what it means to be an activist. Now, we won't be covering anything that would be considered racist, transphobic, etc. But we will have people on that are right-leaning that are doing some sort of activism in that realm, whether it be pro-life, maybe some anti-CRT legislation, activism, etc. Where we'll also be covering people on the political left on how their journey through activism and what got them involved. The reason that we are doing Praxis Run is because we believe, and is part of our mission, that it is best for people to understand each other and to tamp down on vitriol that we are experiencing in the country, and hopefully that will help eliminate some of the divisiveness that we are experiencing, and thus partisanship. Now, this isn't to say that we ourselves aren't partisan to a degree. It just means that we don't like not being able to talk about issues that are important to people and, calling them all sorts of names, that sort of stuff. The kind of toxicity that we're experiencing in our politics, it is pushing us to the brink of whatever. So that's why we're going to do Praxis Run. We also do another podcast called Cypher State, and those will also include more in-depth analysis that isn't necessarily in a panel, so that we can make it a thing that happens more often. So we're going to do that once a month again, starting up again next month. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with the show. All right, welcome back, everybody. Let's go ahead and get started. And with the first run of today, we will be getting started with Ukraine. Oh, did it come up? Oh, wait, why isn't it coming up? Seriously? It's not showing up now. What the frick? All right, well, regardless of which, I made a bunch of slides and stuff to make it our stuff a little bit more professional, and it's not wanting to show up. So, yeah, we'll just go ahead and get started, and I'll figure that out later. All right. Of course, starting to... Okay, so let's start with Ukraine and updates that are happening therein. So Russia's war on Ukraine entered its 15th day today. We begin tonight with an update. The flagship Russian Black Sea Fleet, the Moskva missile cruiser, was set ablaze earlier today. Russia's defense minister said that the sailors had contained the fire and that the measures were being taken to tow it back to port. The ministry reported that the fire started after ammunition blew up on board. He claimed that the cruiser's main weaponry had not been damaged. The ship's crew was evacuated onto another ship in the Black Sea. It said it was still trying to establish the cause of the incident. This is Russia saying this. The Soviet-era ship was badly damaged by the fire, the latest setback for Russia, which has suffered a series of blows since its invasion began on February 24th. Ukraine's southern military commander said on Thursday that it hit the Moskva with a Neptune anti-ship cruise missile. It said Russians' rescue ships were then hampered by ammunition exploding on board, as well as bad weather that had caused the Moskva to start sinking. Now, Reuters was unable to verify either side of this story, but it was verified at 4:10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time that the ship has indeed sunk. And we have some pictures for you of that ship, so let's go ahead and get it over to that. Of course, it's... What? Of course. All right. Now I have to click on it to get it to work. Man, technology sometimes. So this is the ship in question that was struck by this missile. So as you can see, a big missile. And it set ablaze. And you can see here that, yeah, we see it. See that it's on fire. So that is what Ukraine was able to do today. Now, continuing on here. Now, there's weapon support that is being requested by the Ukrainian military and officials as well. Now, the response of the global community to Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine remains unprecedented, both in public outcry and meeting Ukraine's needs for weapons. Earlier in the war, NATO and the EU concentrated on small arms ammunition, anti-armor missiles, and anti-aircraft missiles, and protective and medical equipment. Now, as Russia forces prepare for a massive assault on the Donbas region, the tide is, in fact, turning. The envelope for what people are prepared to provide has grown considerably in the last couple of weeks, a U.S. official had said. Once Ukrainian forces were able to hold off the Russian invasion for the first few days, it put the options of security assistance very quickly in a different place. Slovakia provided Ukraine with S-300 anti-aircraft missiles. The Czech Republic sent in T-72 tanks. The United Kingdom announced that it would ship 120 armored vehicles to Ukraine. In the US, President Biden announced a new $800 million tranche of weapons that includes 11 Mi-17 helicopters, 18 howitzer cannons, and 300 more Switchblade drones, armored personnel carriers, in addition to radar systems capable of tracking incoming fire and pinpointing its origin. Now, U.S. officials also told CNN today that that's by design, arguing that because Russia, after failing to capture Kyiv, has shifted its strategy to concentrate forces on eastern Ukraine. The U.S. is shifting its own strategy in what it gives Ukraine. Quote, the contours of what they need is very different, the U.S. official said. Now, the weapons being provided are focused on the type of fighting that's likely to take place in the Donbass region, where the terrain is on open ground. This differs from the close fighting in urban and wooded areas that occurred around areas of Kyiv and other Ukrainian cities. The Donbass region also borders southwest Russia, allowing Russian forces... Hold on, let me turn this down a little bit. Allowing Russia's forces to avoid the sort of sustained logistic and communication problems that has worked against their all-out invasion of the country nearly from the beginning. As a sign of the coordination of assistance to Ukraine, the European Union announced it would provide another 544 million euros in aid on the same day that the White House announced its own $800 million package. Now, further reports indicate that the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, or OSCE, determined in a fact-finding report published on Wednesday that Russia has broken international humanitarian law by deliberately targeting civilians. The report further states that those who ordered attacks on a maternity hospital and theater being used as shelter in Mariupol committed war crimes. The Vienna-based security body accused Russia of broadly targeting hospitals, schools, residential buildings, and water facilities in its military operations, leading to civilian deaths and injuries. Quote, taken as a whole, the report documents the catalog of inhumanity perpetuated by Russian forces in Ukraine. Michael Carpenter, U.S. ambassador for the OSCE, said in a speech on Wednesday. Continuing on, he states that this includes evidence of direct targeting of civilians, attacks to medical facilities, rape, executions, looting, and forced deportation of civilians into Russia. Now, overall, the investigation found that clear patterns of international humanitarian law violations by the Russian forces in their conduct of hostilities, the report said. The 110-page report also found credible evidence suggesting that such violations concerning even the most fundamental human rights have been committed mostly in the areas under effective control of Russia. The question of whether Russia's crimes amount to genocide is outside the scope of the OSCE's mission. But Michael Carpenter, U.S. ambassador to the OSCE, who contributed a report, said, quote, President Biden was very clear, calling the events in Ukraine genocide due to increasing evidence that President Putin is trying to wipe out the idea of being able to be Ukrainian. This desire to destroy the Ukrainian people has been seen in the horrific images of Russia's barbaric treatment of civilians and in areas that were previously under Russian control. It's also evidenced in the speeches of Russian leaders and press articles appearing in Russian media that deny Ukraine the right to exist as an independent state. Now, I'm going to go off script a little bit here, meaning that I'm going to pontificate a little bit. So, genocide has a very particular legal and philosophical definition. Not every war that pits one ethnicity against another ethnicity constitutes genocide. Genocide requires the direct attempt, at least, to wipe a people off the face of the planet. It is very closely tied to ethnic cleansing, where it's the same idea but over a geographical area. Putin's comments, as stated earlier, have led people to believe that he is committing a genocide, basically targeting Ukrainians as a non-entity, as a people that doesn't exist, as a artificial, in his words, artificial creation of the USSR and Russia due to feckless leadership and the want of creating some sort of cohesive semi-independent structure within. So in Putin's eyes, Ukrainians are just Russians with a different dialect, or more or less. And so if the idea is, if he is actually attempting to destroy a culture, which is what genocide is, culture that in Ukraine of Ukrainians, then yes, it does rise to the level of genocide. Even if the programs are not what we would consider to be evident of that. No mass slaughters, etc. Because genocide can include forced re-education, similar to what we've seen in China and the United States and Canada with indigenous people, and the like. It doesn't necessarily require the outright killing systematically or otherwise. So if that is what is going on here, then it is fair to call it genocide. But that does wrap up our reports on Ukraine for this evening. So let's continue on with US politics directly. And we're going to start today off with Congress ending trade with Russia. Now, the Senate unanimously passed legislation last week to end normal trade relations with Russia in the latest step, Russia, which is the latest step to combat its invasion of Ukraine. Now, the House quickly followed suit in a broad bipartisan vote of 420 to 3. 3 Republicans, Matt Gaetz, Mary Taylor Greene, and Thomas Macy, voted against the measure. President Biden signed the legislation on Friday. Biden also signed a bill codifying his U.S. ban on Russian oil import. The development comes after about a month after Biden, along with other groups of the G7 nations, vowed to do so. Now, the G7 nations are the top 7 economies in the world. They come together to talk about trade relations and what have you, and try to come sort of some sort of consensus in order to tamp down on any and basically in order to smooth any ruffled feathers, essentially. And so if the G7 says, "Hey, fuck you," you're gonna get fucked. Now, the permanent revoke of normal trade relations with Russia or any other nation requires an act of Congress. The legislation allows Biden to place higher tariffs on Russian imports and will further stifle Russia's economy, which has already been hit hard by international sanctions imposed due to the war in Ukraine. Now, coming off that, Vladimir Putin has also announced sanctions against 398 members of the United States Congress as retaliation for the sanctions pressed against members of the Duma, which is Russia's parliament. These mere sanctions hold no real power, and many among those 398 have declared them to be a badge of honor. So, I'm curious why the 3 Republicans voted against these things. So, for those of people who might not know, Thomas Massey is a staunch libertarian, and when I say that, I mean he's more libertarian than probably Ron Paul's libertarian. Like, that's how libertarian this guy is. So it might be part of his whole, well, I don't like sanctions, I don't like this because it impacts our ability to get what we need, and it's all these other things, and very much an isolationist kind of stance that he tends to have. I mean, this guy, in this guy's personal life, he like basically ran around every single like local ordinance, or figured out a way to run around every single local ordinance so he could build his own like homestead in Kentucky. He's that kind of person, right? Not knocking it. I'm just saying this is the kind of person he is, to give you some clarity of what might be the reason that he is sanctions. But it also could be the fact that there is a little bit of like maybe solidarity between, you know, conservative leaning people and Russia and Putin. Putin has gotten praise from several political pundits on the political right. This, of course, was before some of them got steered in a different direction, most notably Tucker Carlson. And maybe that is why these other two Republicans, Matt Gaetz and Mary Taylor Greene, have voted against those sanctions because they see in Putin a fellow traveler. Why would they see Putin as a fellow traveler? Well, it could be because of his more recent, maybe not exactly super recent, but a bit recent conversion. No, conversion is the wrong word. Propping up the Eastern Orthodox Church, passing bills that are considered anti-gay bills, similar to what's being that's not the right word either. Harsher than what's being passed in the United States, but in a similar there. Hey, thank you, Doug, for the follow. Appreciate it. And so that could be partly here what we're seeing, is that they see Putin as a fellow conservative, very macho, very much anti-gay, anti-trans, pro-traditional quote-unquote values, and fighting, a lot of people during the Syrian war said that we should ally with Russia against the Islamic State. And so it could be part of that as well. I don't know what that means. So that's probably partly why we're seeing this. It could also be that they're bought and paid for. And in that vein, we're going to start to talk about updates about the January 6th investigation. And we're going to start off with a quote from Liz Cheney. Quote, "I think what we have seen is a massive and well-organized, well-planned effort that used multiple tools to try to overturn an election," Liz Cheney told CNN Jake Tapper on the State of the Union. Representative Liz Cheney, the Wyoming Republican who broke with her party to join the committee, said it was absolutely clear that Trump and a number of people around him knew their actions were unlawful, but did them anyways. Cheney's interview followed a CNN exclusive that directly ties the former president's son, Donald Trump Jr., to a concerted effort to overturn the 2020 presidential election, even as votes were still being counted. In text messages to then White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, days after the 2020 election, Trump Jr. lays out avenues around the election outcome. Quote, "It's very simple," Trump Jr. wrote in a text message to Meadows on November 5th, 2020. "We have multiple paths, and we control them all." Trump Jr.'s text also referenced having Congress reject enough slates of electors so that neither Trump nor Biden had a majority of 270 electoral votes, forcing a contingent election where the House of Representatives would vote by state delegation to elect the president. Now, it needs to be important here. So it's in our circles, in our political circles, is very common knowledge that if a president does not reach, if a single person running for president does not reach 270 electoral votes to win, 270 to win, then it gets kicked back down to the House. What isn't known by a lot of people is that the House doesn't vote member to member. It votes on a state-by-state basis, and the state delegations determine who wins. They have to come to consensus as a delegation and then vote for the person to be president. So it's very much in the line of these are representing states and state interests should be represented here, like the founding of the country was in the first place. And so pretty much any time that there is a because they can deadlock and their vote doesn't count, right? So it does give it gives more populous states the same leverage as the same amount of vote, similar to the Senate, as lower population states, because you vote as a collective and it's only one vote. So California gets one vote. They have to decide as a delegation how that vote goes. So does Wyoming. So does New Jersey, etc. And so it gives rural states an advantage there. And the thinking was, hey, if we invalidate enough of these electors, then Republicans can just pick the winner. And that's what he goes on to say within those text messages. Quote, "Republicans control 28 states, Democrats 22 states," Trump Jr. said. "Once again, Trump wins. We either have a vote, we control, and we win, or it gets kicked to Congress 6 January 2021, Trump Jr. said. Trump Jr. also suggested that if none of those plans worked, Congress could simply vote to reinstall Trump for a second term, which is clearly not codified in any election law. Quote, "We have operational control, total leverage," Trump Jr. wrote in a message to Meadows. "Moral high ground, POTUS must start second term now." Trump Jr.'s text to Meadows also discussed people he thought should be purged from the federal government. Fire Fauci, Trump Jr. wrote, referencing FBI Director Christopher Wray and Dr. Anthony Fauci, who is subject to certain protections as a civil servant and cannot be unilaterally fired by the president. Trump Jr. also suggested that DOJ should select special prosecutors on hard drive from hell Biden crime family. That's a quote. An idea that then Attorney General Bill Barr rejected. The piece together narrative we've learned from the House committee investigating the January 6th insurrection has suggested former President Donald Trump and his supporters were actively trying to overturn the 2020 presidential election. These new developments supercharge that narrative. Many questions remain, not the least of which are whether the committee will suggest charging either Trump or his closest advisors or family members with a crime, and whether the Department of Justice would choose to prosecute such crimes. In recent weeks, though, Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner sat for depositions with the House Select Committee investigating the insurrection. The panel met virtually with Kushner, Donald Trump's son-in-law and former top White House advisor, after he voluntarily agreed to speak with the committee. The source described Kushner as being cooperative and friendly, adding that he did the talking as opposed to having his lawyer speak for him. Now, Representative Lane Lurie, a Democrat from Virginia, a member of the January 6th committee, told MSNBC's Nicole Wallace that Kushner, quote, was able to voluntarily provide information to us to verify, substantiate, provide his own take on this different reporting, adding, "So it was really valuable for us to have the opportunity to speak with him." Now, Ivanka Trump also testified before the House committee, appearing virtually before investigators to answer questions for several hours. Now, committee chairman Benny Thompson of Mississippi told reporters that unlike some witnesses who appeared before the committee, she did not, to his knowledge, attempt to invoke the Fifth Amendment or executive privilege to avoid giving the committee information. Stephen Miller, a former aide to Trump, testified to the committee today that after initially fighting a subpoena. Both Don Sacovoni and Peter Navarro have been referred to the Department of Justice, being charged with contempt of Congress for refusing to answer the committee's subpoenas. Now, former President Donald Trump, in a new interview with the Washington Post, called his daughter Ivanka's testimony before the House Select Committee investigation a riot, a shame, and harassment. In that same interview, Trump said he regretted not marching to the U.S. Capitol the day his supporters stormed the building. He defended his long silence during the attacks by claiming House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and others were responsible for ending the deadly violence. Quote, "I thought it was a shame, and they kept asking, why isn't she doing something about it? Why isn't Nancy Pelosi doing something about it?" I can't do the voice. And the mayor of D.C. also. The former mayor of D.C. and Nancy Pelosi are in charge, Trump said. I hated seeing it. And I said, it's got to be taken care of. And I assumed they were taking care of it. Never mind the fact that Trump could easily have gotten on national TV and be like, "Hey, y'all, my supporters, my boys, what you doing? Why you rioting? You shouldn't be destroying anything. That's not what we do." And it would have ended. Because he has that kind of pull with his followers. He really, really does. And it's really bad. See if I can get this image up now. I don't know why it's not showing up. Yeah, it's not showing up. I don't know why. Well, anyways. So, okay, continuing on. On at least a dozen occasions in the interview, Trump blamed Pelosi for the events on January 6th. On that day, Pelosi was taken to a secure location and worked with some of Trump's top military officials and others to help secure the building. Trump supporters stormed her office and vowed to hurt her, with some shouting for her by name. Trump repeated unsubstantiated claims of voter fraud, saying new findings from Georgia would emerge next week, which is probably, most assuredly, a fucking lie. He said that they would be released by a group called True the Vote and would show millions of illegal votes, but he offered no proof, because there is none. All this is the majority of this is an attempt to either keep the money coming or keep support momentum going so he can run again in 2024. Either way, it's lies and bullshit. And speaking of voter fraud, though, Trump's former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, was removed from North Carolina voter rolls this week as the state investigation into allegations that he himself committed voter fraud continues. The Macon County Board of Elections Director, Melania Telbalt, confirmed that she removed Meadows' registration from the county's voter rolls on Monday. She told CNN that Macon County administratively removed the voter registration of Mark Meadows as he lived in Virginia and last voted in 2020 election there. Records show that the last election that Meadows voted in Macon County, North Carolina, was the 2020 general election. He voted absentee by mail. An absentee ballot request from Meadows was submitted the first week of October 2020 with a request to send the ballot to Alexandria, Virginia's address. Last month, the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation confirmed to CNN that its special investigation unit was investigating allegations that Mark Meadows registered to vote in 2020 at a home where he never resided. The investigation is being carried out in conjunction with the North Carolina State Board of Elections. The investigation followed a report in the New Yorker magazine that Meadows registered to vote weeks before the 2020 election at a mobile home in Macon County, where he allegedly never lived or even visited. The article quoted the unnamed former owner of the McCall Road property in Scaly Mountain as saying that Meadows' wife, quote, reserved the house for 2 months at some point within the last few years. Couldn't remember exactly when, but only spent 1 or 2 nights there, and that Meadows himself had never spent a night there at all. So it's very interesting to see that we are seeing actual news come out that... could y'all hear me? My mic was turned down. I hope y'all could have heard me. Anyways, I'm going to turn it up a little bit. And it's too late now. It's been 30 minutes. All right. So it's very interesting to me that we saw that the claims of voter fraud coming out of the Trump administration is surrounded by voter fraud coming from within the Trump administration and allies, etc. When there was actual reporting of voter fraud in, I believe it was 2016, a good percentage of the vote fraud from then was by Republicans trying to vote twice due to their erroneous belief that Democrats were doing it, so they needed to even the playing field. But yeah, that's just one of the many things that we see on a regular basis here. On a regular basis. But I want to know what you think. Let me know. Go ahead and hit us up at crowdsourced poll for now. Crowdsourced poll on Twitter. We like to hear from you. Now, continuing on though with some more news here, and we have a brief update for stuff coming out of the Supreme Court of the United States. Now, after contentious hearings that saw Republican senators playing to QAnon members of their base, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson was confirmed by the full Senate last week. 3 Republicans voted to confirm her, defying the hopes that her confirmation would be a shutout by their party. Senator Mitt Romney of Utah, Susan Collins of Maine, and Lisa Murkowski of Alaska were the only Republicans to support Jackson's confirmation, and may be the only moderate Republicans that are actually left in the Senate. Justice Jackson will take the bench in October upon the retirement of Justice Stephen Breyer, and we wish her all the best, because a lot of the smears that came out against her during the confirmation hearing, which we covered in depth, you can check out the video, was slanderous. Honestly, they were trying to paint her as some sort of pedophile apologist, despite the fact that judges across the country ruled in similar ways, and she was not outside of the norm of ruling against of rulings dealing with people charged with crimes of pedophilia. But yeah, so we hope that she does well on the bench, and we also think that she's going to be fairly moderate, despite Republicans hemming and hawing about her being a radical and being soft on crime. There's no evidence to that, and she actually might actually be an originalist. So yeah, there's that. All right, but we got more to cover, so let's cover more, starting with some state politics. So state politics, we're going to come out of New Jersey first. So with all the restrictive and oppressive legislation happening around sex education in public schools, New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy, a Democrat, is like a breath of fresh air. New Jersey in 2020 adopted new social and sexual health education standards to help students better respect and accept each other's differences, including gender identity and gender expression. Quote, I think there's some sort of sense that parents have no say, and I would just say empathetically that parents deserve absolutely to have a say in this sort of stuff, along with all the other interested parties, but probably none more interested than parents, Murphy told reporters Monday, and Fox News reported. But Murphy added that he believes some politicians have insincerely taken up the issue of parental rights and have been railing against sexual orientation and gender identity being brought up in schools simply to score political points. Quote, I say that on behalf of the LGBTQ plus communities, Murphy said, let's everybody not use this to divide us. Under the new standards, students by the 5th grade are expected to know, among other things, the difference between sexual orientation and gender identity. By the 8th grade, students in New Jersey should be able to distinguish between gender identity, gender expression, and sexual orientation, according to the new standards, which replaced the guidelines set in 2014. Now, in the letter sent this week to Murphy and State Senate President Nicholas Scarlatti, New Jersey Senate Republicans called for state leadership to halt the implementation of the new education standards and hold public hearings on the changes to, quote, empower parents who feel ignored. And by that, he means the loud, shouty kind, who haven't been ignored, they just lost. Quote, we have heard from a rapidly growing number of parents who are extremely concerned after learning about changes to state curriculum standards relating to sex education that they believed are inappropriate for their children or in conflict with their values. Now, those are the same thing to these people. It's not that it's not that parents believe. Let me take that back. There are some legitimate concerns about when a child should be exposed to the idea of sex. We can debate that, all right? Schools across the country, it's around 5th grade or so where they start talking about puberty and stuff, because that's about when puberty starts for a lot of people. So talking about puberty and sex and, feelings bubbling up due to hormones and things like that makes sense to have those conversations at the time. Now, there are other things though, such as telling kids that, hey, sometimes, a kid can have 2 dads or 2 moms, or sometimes people don't feel like they're in the right body and stuff like that. So ways to talk about this to children in ways that they understand are not sexual at all, and they shouldn't be considered inappropriate. Telling kids that gay people exist is just reality, and it should be part of education for civics reasons. So it's real for those people, the people that say we shouldn't talk about it at all. It's really about a conflict of values. It's not about being inappropriate in the sense of like, oh, these kids are too young to understand. It's more like, I don't want my kid to be told that gay people exist and they should be treated with respect. And if you go online, any conservative leaning space, you'll see, derisions against gay people, trans people, etc., about how they're one way or the other, and people shouldn't respect them. You can go that, you find it on Twitch, you can find it on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, everywhere. You just go into these spaces, and the minute you say trans people exist or gay people exist and should be treated with respect, you get a deluge of basically telling people to go back to the closet, or be you yourself being called gay and that's why you care type of thing. And that's why we're seeing a lot of this pushback happening in schools, or happening against schools that want to teach about it. Now, but let's continue on. Now, this argument that the new standards were adopted at a time where most people were focused on navigating the many day-to-day impacts of the pandemic. In other words, they're saying that he continued on and basically saying, well, we can't talk about this now. We got the pandemic. It's bullshit. All right. So continuing on, though, and on a Facebook post on Tuesday, New Jersey Senate Education Chair Vin Gopal, a Democrat, called on Murphy and the State Department of Education to provide clarity on the new standards, given that, quote, the amount of misinformation and questions from parents. Quote, have formally called on the Department of Education and the governor's office to provide clarity on all these items and issue it publicly before any further action is taken upon implementation, Gopal wrote. Now, New Jersey's last year adopted a law requiring state schools to include instructions in kindergarten through 12th grade on diversity and inclusion in an appropriate place in the curriculum. That includes promoting diversity in connection with gender and sexual orientation. Now we gotta talk about Texas, my home state. Well, not my home state. I get home state's where you're born or raised, right? So my state of residence, I guess, where I'm currently living. Well, either way, whatever you want to call it, we got to talk about Texas, y'all. And Texas is doing a lot of fucked up shit. So let's talk about it. Starting with the Governor Abbott's busing of immigrants to Washington, D.C. Wait. Yes, you heard me correctly. We're going to bus immigrants across the country from Texas because reasons? All right. Turning now to the state many people love to hate. Let's see what Republican Governor Greg Abbott is up to this week. Yesterday, Abbott congratulated himself Wednesday for dumping a busload of immigrants in the heart of the Washington, D.C. area as part of a political tantrum over President Joe Biden's immigration policies. The stunt allows the Biden administration to more immediately meet the needs of people they are allowing to cross the border, Abbott claimed in a press release. Now, the migrants arriving at a building near Capitol Hill that is home to the Washington Bureau of Fox News, NBC News, and C-SPAN. They were greeted by staff from the Catholic Church of D.C., a group that offered food assistance, medical care, job training, and English lessons, a spokesperson told the Huffington Post. Now, Abbott's office said that the travel arrangements to Washington were a voluntary process in which individuals needed to show Homeland Security documentations to board a bus or plane. The Texas Division of Emergency Management was directed to coordinate their travel plans as well. Let's watch a video about that now.
Wednesday morning, around 30 people dropped off at D.C.'s Union Station after Texas Governor Greg Abbott ordered his state to charter buses to bring an untold number of migrants to D.C. to protest the Biden administration's policy, which allows people seeking asylum to stay in the U.S. while they wait for a hearing.
We are sending them to the United States Capitol, where the Biden administration will be able to more immediately address the needs of the people that they are allowing to come across our border.
So essentially what he's saying here, and let's make no mistake about it, is that, hey, it's not our problem, it's the federal government, so they can do it there and immediately do it. That's not how the federal government works. This is a political stunt to show voters in Texas, and that's what this is about, that Greg Abbott is on their side, because Texas has a lot of very, I won't say far right, but close to far right people that vote in the Republican primaries and at large in the state. Texas conservatives are very conservative, and this is to shore up his base to show that he can stick it to the federal government in the Texas way and also tackle problems, at least problems that his constituents believe that are impacting the state negatively, and that includes things such as immigration. There's some things to be said about how much a state can actually accommodate for a increase in immigration into its own state, but Texas is not one of those states that have those problems. Texas is pretty rich. It has a lot of resources. It's sitting on a $1 billion or $2 billion rainy day fund that it never taps for anything except probably money laundering, or, pet projects for politicians. Good old boy network, right? Like, they didn't even tap into it during the pandemic. It was nuts. It's nuts. Businesses closing all across Texas, but they didn't even tap it to like give loans or nothing. So let's continue on though.
These are all migrants who have been processed by CBP and are free to travel, so it's nice the state of Texas is helping them get to their final destination as they await in their outcome of their immigration proceedings.
But for about half of those on this first bus, Catholic Charities says they are a long way from knowing what's next or how they will get there.
Now, it should be noted here. So it was voluntary, but how voluntary is it going to be if a police officer comes up to you and tries to tell you, hey, we have this bus that we think you should get on, or whatever, however they approached it, or if you don't leave, we're going to arrest you, kind of thing. Like, you can't know what was actually done to get these people to agree to be on the bus to go to DC. Let's continue.
One of them did tell me I didn't really have a choice.
Yeah,
we felt like it was the only way to get out of Texas. I'd like people to know that the people who are coming here are not looking for a handout. That's not what they want. They're looking to build something.
We are expecting another bus here at Union Station tonight, possibly in the next few minutes.
All right, so that concludes that video. So now Texas Democrats said that Abbott was merely working to demonize immigrants. Quote, for years, Texas Republicans have looked to the southern border as a wedge issue, creating a narrative that stirs up emotions but neglects the truth, the Texas Democratic Party said in a statement on Monday. Now, for Abbott's part, he has spoken out harshly against Biden's stance on immigration, miscategorizing the president's immigration policy as one of open borders, when not much has changed from the Trump era despite Biden's campaign promises, or being slow to change. Either way. Quote, as the federal government continues to turn a blind eye to the border crisis, the state of Texas will remain steadfast in our efforts to fill in the gaps and keep Texans safe, Abbott said in a statement on Wednesday, furthering perpetuating a lie that immigrants are largely dangerous. Now, by busing migrants to Washington, D.C., the Biden administration will be able to more immediately meet the needs of the people they are allowing across the border. These people are legally allowed to cross the border in the method that they are crossing. In fact, you all should check out our talk with Nathan Dallin on immigration policy. And I think that was, let me see here, if I can get the YouTube link, because he is an expert in this field. It's what he does on a day-to-day basis. He very much helps with immigration policy and understands it, the ins and out of it very well, including all of the issues that not only immigrants face, but the legal system faces as well. So we will get that. Here we go. Conversations is United. I'll find the link here in a second. Jeez. Immigration. Here we go. CAP talks immigration policy. All right, we're dropping that link for you now in the chat. There you go. Go ahead and check out that video. It explains a hell of a lot about this issue, and it is very well worth your time. Continuing on, though. But we have to continue on. So also coming out of Texas is other things that deal with another trucker protest. What is that about? Well, let's talk about it. So a long trial of delivery trucks are backed up at the U.S.-Mexico border because the Texas governor is refusing to allow them to come into the United States without additional inspections by Texas state troopers. This is unnecessary, but it's again to fight against illegal immigration. Typically, it's the federal government that inspects trucks. The decision is creating a massive backup at the border. According to the Texas Tribune this week, that the Texas Tribune reported this week that the busiest trade crossing, the bridge connecting Pharr and Reynosa, is the choke point. On the border on Monday, the trucks were backed up for miles. It was the fifth day in a row that they were dealing with the bridge blockade. And as a result, producer importers canceled orders. At a time when Americans are frustrated over inflation and additional costs, Abbott's backup is significantly slashing supply and access to the United States, the White House said in a statement on Wednesday. Let's go ahead and watch a video related to this as well. Gotta get it forward. Here we go. There we go.
Between Texas and Washington. Abbott has accused Democratic President Joe Biden of failing to secure the border. The Biden administration says that the Republican governor, who is seeking a third term in office, is pulling a political stunt that is hurting American consumers. Here's White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki on Wednesday.
I think we're trying to state the facts of what another political stunt that we're seeing happen and the impact of it.
Absolutely true.
What we're seeing is right now,
Pinocchios.
Factually, there's over $1 million in trade crossing over the U.S.-Mexico border every minute. These actions are impacting people's jobs and the livelihoods of hardworking families in Texas and across the country. That's not a political statement. That's a statement of fact.
Meanwhile, U.S. Customs and Border Protection said in a statement the long waits were due to, quote, additional and unnecessary inspections ordered by Abbott and were causing, quote, critical impacts to an already strained supply chain. The new measures have infuriated industry groups, which have warned of shortages of perishable products.
No, not my avocados. My avocados. I don't even eat avocados, but seriously though, like it's going to negatively impact food prices, not just in Texas, but across the country as long as these backups and delays are being done due to political fuckery. And with that, it might have been the truth statements that we just heard, or maybe it was the ire of the White House press secretary, or maybe it was the huge outcry. But Governor Abbott actually adjusted his stance on this last night. Abbott announced that he would stop the inspections at the Laredo Columbia Bridge after meeting with Nuevo Leon Governor Samuel Garcia. He said others would follow with more collaboration with Mexico to increase inspections on the Mexican side, which means more unnecessary inspections. It's still we're gonna do a delay. Oh man. Okay. Republicans are complaining about inflation. Everybody's complaining about inflation. Why would you do something that's going to directly make inflation worse for political points? It's fucking asinine. Oh, it's so frustrating. I just... Causing intentional damage to citizens of the United States to score political points, not for any sort of actual factual agenda, is the epitome of political fuckery. And if you're a Republican who hates the fact that other people are doing these political actions that you don't think should exist, then I'm sorry, you should be totally complaining to Governor Abbott right now and other Republicans. They're unnecessarily making your life harder. This is, we say things like Republicans claim to be for small government and keep on helping the little guy a little bit with odious regulations and everything like that. But Jesus, fuck, dude, I just can't with these people, man. It's just so asinine. Hey, Ward Cleaver CB. Glad for you to join us. And yes, I guess I am Ben Affleck's not famous younger brother. Thank you for the compliment. Appreciate it. All right. But we need to continue on and wrap up this little part of the news segment. So one entry point, the Far Bridge, saw wait times increase from 63 minutes to 320 minutes, and traffic through the port dropped 35% as 2,000 to 3,000 trucks waited back to back at the bridge, according to the Washington Post. The extended delays were spoiling millions of dollars worth of produce, as some truckers have had to wait in line for up to 30 hours. In the hot sun, it's already 83 degrees plus here in Texas on the after 12 o'clock in the afternoon. It's just I've already said it. This was asinine, and I really hope that more Republicans and conservatives call out this shit. But I don't think that they will. We're talking about not the trucker convoy. We're talking about the fact that Texas recently increased wait times for trucks entering the United States because Governor Abbott wants to win re-election by appealing to anti-immigrant activists within his party. So that's what we just talked about just now. But we do have to move on to another thing coming out of Texas. And this one's going to be near and dear to a lot of people's hearts because it directly impacts them. And it's also impacting children. For those that may not be aware, I think it was about a month ago or so. Texas, or 2 months ago. 2 months ago or so. Texas Attorney General issued not an order, but like a suggestion to have Child Protective and Family Services, go after parents of trans kids and charge them with child abuse and neglect for respecting their gender identity. We're going to talk about that now. And it's sad that we have to, but this is important. So let's go ahead and talk about it. So Morgan Davis, a transgender man, joined Texas Child Welfare Agency as an investigator to be the advocate he never had growing up. Less than a year later, one of the first cases under Governor Greg Abbott's order to investigate parents of transgender children landed on his desk. His supervisors in the Travis County office of the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services offered to reassign the case, but maybe he thought he was the right person for the job. Quote, "If somebody was going to do it, I'm glad it was me," David said. He hoped it would be reassuring to the family to see a transgender man at the helm of the investigation, but the family lawyers didn't see it that way. She said, "I know your intentions are good, but by walking in that door as a representative for the state, you are saying in a sense that you condone this, that you agree with it," Davis said. "It hit me like a thunderbolt. It's true," he continued on. "By me being there for even a split second, a child could think they've done something wrong." Davis resigned shortly after that. Since the directive went into effect, each member of his 4-person unit has put in their notices as well. While the Attorney General's office has gone to great lengths to defend the governor's directive in court, the agency responsible for carrying out the investigations has been roiled by resistance and resignations as employees struggle with the ethical questions they've never faced before. More than a dozen child abuse investigators told the Texas Tribune that they either have resigned or actively job hunting as a result of this directive. A spokesperson for the Department of Family Protective Services declined to comment on the resignations or answer any specific questions, citing pending litigation. Quote, "In all investigations, we follow state law to determine if abuse or neglect has occurred, and we will continue to do so," the department said in a statement. The employees, most of whom spoke on the condition of anonymity to protect their jobs, said they feel conflicted, unwilling to undertake what they see as a discriminatory investigations, and critical of the agency's internal response to requests for guidance, but haunted by what a mass exodus of experienced child abuse investigators would mean for the state's most vulnerable children. Things are already slipping through the cracks. We will see investigations that get closed when intervention could have occurred, one supervisor said. And children will die in Texas. And the reason that they're saying children will die in Texas is because so many investigators and people that worked for Department of Family Protective Services have resigned in protest of this law. And it is an ethical dilemma that people that care so deeply about protecting the lives of children, protecting their safety, of ensuring that they can get as full life as possible with some help from the state, are put into this conundrum, because not only are they being asked to enforce a law or an ordinance or whatever you want to call it. It's effectively a law, but it's like an executive order, essentially. Enforce an executive order that will harm children and make them complicit in that harm. And on the same time, being felt that they have to stay despite this, because if they resign, like many of them have in protest, that more children will get hurt because of it. And this is really a shame on the governor. Governor Abbott this is appalling. But let's continue on. So gender-affirming care is endorsed by all major medical associations as the proper treatment for gender dysphoria. The distress someone can feel when their assigned sex does not align with their gender identity. While many young people focus on social transition, dressing differently, or using different pronouns, some are prescribed puberty blockers, which are reversible, or hormone therapy. Davis felt that the directive was an unnecessary overreach. He knew firsthand that the care and caution that doctors take when prescribing treatments for gender dysphoria. Even the person who made the child abuse report didn't seem to agree with the directive. Davis said they were sobbing on the phone, distraught that they were reporting the family, but the person was mandated by law to report child abuse and feared the consequences of not making a report. So if you're not aware, there are several people in public service that are mandatory reporters for instances of child abuse. These are teachers, nurses, doctors, psychologists, counselors, youth director, people that like in Boys and Girls Clubs, etc. So anybody that essentially on their day-to-day job is responsible for the care of children is by law required to report child abuse. And under this new legal directive, gender affirming care is being considered child abuse. And it's all over cultural bullshit. It's because people believe, due to their religion or what have you, that allowing a child to just be, because that's really what it is in the vast majority of cases, just allowing a child to be, to express themselves, to exist, is child abuse. It's ridiculous. The person said to him, "Just promise you'll be kind," Davis remembered. When he visited the family, the house was clean, the pantry was well stocked, and the kids were healthy, happy, and well loved. He tried to be as reassuring as possible, reiterating again and again what a good job the parents were doing raising the children in a safe and loving way. But the family was clearly terrified, he said. Quote, "It was just heartbreaking to me, to everyone, to see what we were doing, to see what we had become," Davis said. After that, Davis said he couldn't keep working for an agency that would target families this way. Last week, he put in his notice. He is going to keep working until mid-May to wrap up as many of his open cases as he can to help minimize the burden on his colleagues. But even though Davis told his supervisor that there was no evidence of abuse, the investigation into the child's family will remain open, likely long after he's left, while the state continues to fight in court for the right to investigate parents just like these. Employees at the Travis County Department for Family and Protective Services office say they found out about Abbott's directive the same way most people did, on the news. They were shocked and devastated to see that their agency became politicized, several had stated. When they got an invitation to an emergency staff meeting the next day, many of them hoped that they would be told the agency wouldn't be following the governor's directive. Instead, they received confirmation that they would now be required to open investigations into reports of parents who provided gender-affirming care to their children. They were instructed to treat these cases very differently than others. According to a meeting agenda reviewed by the Texas Tribune, Supervisors were told that they needed to notify their chain of command when they received one of these cases, and that the agency's general counsel would be working on guidelines to determine how to rule on these cases. Several employees said that they were told to mark all the cases under Abbott's directive as sensitive, a rare designation usually reserved for cases in which the DFPS employees are personally involved. They were also instructed not to communicate about these cases in writing, a directive that struck the employees as unusual, unethical, and risky. Quote, "We document as relentlessly as we do because it's a way to make sure there's individual responsibility for actions that are taken that can be tracked back to who made the decision," said one Travis County child protective investigator. "I could be held responsible for a decision made in my case that I didn't make, but I have no way to defend myself." Investigators and supervisors said they don't typically investigate cases if the only allegation is the parent is giving their child medication prescribed by a doctor. Instead, those cases are ruled out without a formal investigation and designated priority none. In fact, they said, the agency usually gets involved in cases with the opposite problem, parents who won't give their child prescribed medications. But supervisors at the emergency staff meeting say they were told cases in which parents were providing medically prescribed gender-affirming care to their children could not be marked priority none and had to be investigated. Quote, "This is literally a direct contradiction of the policy because we're telling parents we understand that a doctor is telling you to do this, but we don't like it," said one senior level supervisor. Many of those who had stayed have been engaging in a small acts of resistance to the directive. Last week, DFPS workers from several offices signed an amicus brief condemning the order. A week after the directive came out, the American Civil Liberties Union and Lambda Legal filed a lawsuit on behalf of a DFPS employee identified only as Jane Doe, who is under investigation for child abuse for providing gender-affirming care to her 16-year-old daughter. At the hearing, a lawyer for the state said DFPS was not going to investigate every trans youth or every young person undergoing these kind of treatments and procedures. The directive was intended to convey not that gender-affirming treatment are necessarily or per se abusive, but these treatments, like virtually any other implement, could be used by somebody to harm a child, said Assistant Attorney General Ryan Kirchner. Now, watching the hearing, Travis County investigators were confused. In the emergency meeting, after Abbott announced the directive, they say regional leadership told them to the exact opposite. They had to investigate these cases even if there were no evidence that these medications were being forced on a child or otherwise used as some form of abuse. A judge granted temporary restraining order, halting the investigation into that family, and scheduled a hearing to consider a statewide pause for the governor's directive. She reached out to the ACLU to see how she could help block this directive from being implemented and agreed to testify at that hearing. On the stand, she told the judge that the cases being investigated under Abbott's directive are treated differently than others, and that the ethical conundrum those cases had sparked left her no choice but to resign. The judge granted a temporary statewide injunction that day, blocking these investigations from continuing until a full trial in July. Paxton has asked the Texas Supreme Court to intervene, Ken Paxton being the Attorney General, and allow the investigations to continue while the case proceeds through the courts. And given the Texas Supreme Court's makeup, it wouldn't surprise me if they rule in his favor. After several days of confusion, supervisors said they were told that the cases are on pause. They remain open, but investigative activities are currently suspended. The injunction also stops DFPS from investigating new reports of child abuse based solely on allegations that a parent provided gender-affirming care to the child. This is rough. I've already said some of my piece about this. Like, these kids are just letting these kids be is not in any way, shape, or form child abuse. This is a concerted effort to force other people to prescribe to one's political, religious, worldview, whatever you want to call it, ideology by force of government. A lot of conservatives right now are very upset about things, and we'll talk about this, about things that happen on social media, about people being silenced because of their political opinions, whatever those may be. A lot of the times it's somebody saying something that's anti-trans, for instance, and they don't like that. But they have no problem with these laws. In fact, they love these laws. They love these laws and they want them to expand. Not only do they want them to expand, but they want them to be harsher. And they want people to not discuss what, gender, sexuality, racism, white privilege, any of these so-called quote unquote woke ideologies that they call them in school, among friends, peers, with children as old as 18. They don't want it in college campuses, actually, so they don't even want colleges to discuss this stuff. And they want to use the force of government to make it to where these things are not talked about. Why? Well, it's pretty simple. Because they are engaged in ideological war. And it's a culture war. And they believe that if they don't engage in this, that their values will fall to the wayside. And instead of taking it up in the battlefield of ideas, they are going directly to law. Like it happens every single time. And then they call liberals tyrannical, despots, etc. I'm tired of dealing with it. But that is all I'm going to say about this. Now, wrapping up our segment about state laws and state news is Florida. So once again, and this of course it involves Ron DeSantis. It always does at this point. So once again, Ron DeSantis has once again I proposed. Okay. Rewind. All right. Ron DeSantis has once again proposed another congressional map that is in direct violation of the voter-approved constitutional amendment known as Fair Districts. Now, these are the Florida Legislative District Boundaries Amendment Number 5 that was passed in 2010, which amended the practice of drawing legislative district boundaries in such ways that they would establish quote-unquote fairness and as equal in proportion as feasible and use city, county, and geographical boundaries. Florida's Congressional District Boundaries Amendment Number 6, also passed in 2010, amended the practice of drawing congressional district boundaries in such ways that they establish fairness as well and as equal and proportional in population as feasible, also using city, county, and geographical boundaries that already exist as much as possible. So, in other words, the citizens of Florida in 2010 told political gerrymandering to get bent and instead determined that congressional districts, both on the state and federal level, should be drawn in ways that keep communities together and improve representation. And what that means is, like, if you have a geographical area that is predominantly African American, then they should have a district. If you have one that's Latino, it should have a district, etc. These communities, it should be community focused. So this isn't to say like, well, black people have to have a representative. It's more like communities develop and grow and move out and stuff like that, and they're still a cohesive community. There's still a city, there's still a county, what have you, and that those people in that area should be the ones to elect a state representative and a congressional representative. But we can't have that. And the reason that we can't have that is because Republicans, well, both political parties, and I have my own problem with this, but both political parties want to gerrymander as much as possible for political benefit. And we're seeing that, as we reported 2 weeks ago, across the United States from both Democrats and Republicans, that districts are being drawn up in such a way that make them less competitive. And Florida wants to do this. Ron DeSantis specifically wants to do this in such a way that would eliminate at least four Democrat districts from Florida and circumvent, or counter, I should say, not circumvent, counter some of the gains that Democrats made in other states through redistricting and legal challenges. And Ron DeSantis believes that the voter approved initiative is unconstitutional, not just from the state of Florida, but from the United States Supreme Court as well. And so he is trying to set this up in such a way that he would be able to invalidate those redistricting rules and tell the citizens of Florida to go fuck themselves. It's all about small government until it becomes political. And then it's my way or the highway, as they say. Leave it to the Sunshine State to not want so much sunshine when it comes to political redistricting. Now, with all that said, I personally don't. I think that this is going to be an issue for a very long time. It's been one that has plagued the United States system of government almost since the beginning. I think it was 1820 or so where the whole gerrymander thing came into existence as a moniker. There's a funny story about that. Jerry something, I can't remember his full name right now, but he called it a salamander district because he drew this district and he's like, this would make sure that our party wins. And they're like, it's like a salamander. And they're like, no, it's a gerrymander. And the name stuck forever because that's how words work. So, and I think that this is something that we need to constitutionally fix. And it's one that we need to do sooner rather than later, or we're going to find ourselves in possibly in a political situation that we can't fix in the near future. And to do that, I personally like single member district or single transferable vote multi-member districts. Long story short, this system of voting is essentially a instant runoff between in a district between 4+ candidates, or any number of candidates to fill in all the slots. So if a congressional district has four congressional seats, then the first 4 people to pass to get 25% of the vote gets elected. And that's how that district, this larger district, is voted into office. The single transferable vote comes into play if a person gets like 80% of the vote, then their first 25%, they hit the first 25%, cuts it off, right? Probably through, it can be done in different ways. You can randomly select ballots to like transfer over, or you can just do, well, we counted the first, these were the first, 100 people or whatever the number was to get to 25%. All right, everybody else gets their second choice. And it goes so on and so forth. You transfer the super winners votes first, and then you eliminate the worst losers, and then you transfer their votes to their next candidates. First choice, second choice, so on and so forth. And the reason I like this system is because we get somewhat towards proportional representation without making it proportional representation based on party votes. And it allows for some horse trading, which I think is necessary to have a comprehensive political system, a cohesive, rather, political system. And I like that. And it makes, but more importantly, it makes gerrymandering harder because you can draw these giant districts, right? You can pack a bunch of people, like you can pack in now. You can pack and crack, packing, throwing in a bunch of people, cracking is breaking up people into these districts. But if like Florida, what does Florida have? How many congressional seats does Florida have? Florida congressional seats. So Florida has number of 27. So you have 27. If you have 3 districts of 7 each, right? Or I'm sorry, you have 9 districts of I can't math now. My brain's not there. Divided by. So if you have 9 districts rather of 3 each, or if you have 7 if you have 3 districts of nine congressional members each. It's really hard to ensure that your side wins by splitting up the state that way because of scale. It's harder. And so if you have single transferable vote, multi-member district, as well as some of the rules that Florida passed in this in their amendment process, I think that would solve a lot of the redistricting fuckery that we see in the United States. But again, tell me what you think. Go ahead and join us on Discord. We're trying to set up our community. We're trying to get people involved more, have contests and the like in there. So if you like that, go ahead and join Discord, and you can always hit me up at Crowdsourced Poll or now on Twitter. But that's what we have for state roundups. Now, I know what you all came here to hear about. I know it. You know it. We all know it. Everybody's talking about it. And that is Elon Musk going to buy Twitter? So, here's what we have coming out of his SEC filing to buy Twitter. So this submission by Elon Musk to the SEC, quote, states the following, quote, I invested in Twitter as I believed it's in its potential to be the platform for free speech around the globe, and I believe that free speech is a societal imperative for a functioning democracy. However, since making my investment, I now realize that the company will neither thrive nor serve this societal imperative in its current form. Twitter needs to be transformed into or as a private company. As a result, I am offering to buy 100% of Twitter shares for $54.20 per share in cash, a 54% premium over the day before I began investing in Twitter, and a 38% premium over the day before my investment was publicly announced. My offer is my best and final offer, and if it is not accepted, I would need to reconsider my position as a shareholder. Twitter has extraordinary potential, and I, Elon Musk, will unlock it. Now, let's talk about this for a little bit here. All right? Let's talk about some of the things this possibly could be. So, anybody that's been following Elon Musk for a while on Twitter, social media, etc., knows that Elon likes to troll with his big wad of money cash. Money. And he likes making references to 69 and like other Reddited and 4channy meme things. And he offered to buy it for $54.20. There's a 420 reference inside the price itself. And people that have been following Elon Musk know that he likes to do this very often. Very often. This is not the first time he's made a 420 reference. Not the first time he's smoked a doobie, right? So this could all be an elaborate troll on Twitter. He has made claims that he has a plan B if Twitter rejects his offer. Twitter, it being its board of directors and its shareholders, because the board has to go to the shareholders to make this announcement and have them vote in their shares, and only shareholders that own stock with voting rights would vote on this. So in every share is a vote, or every of those shares. I don't know how Twitter is specifically structured, but typically speaking, if you have a share that's worth 1 vote, the more shares you have, the more vote you have. And Elon Musk has 10%. So he himself represents 10% of the vote. And it's already been said by some other Twitter shareholders, so other large big fish, that they do not agree with this transfer, this hostile takeover. One of those is the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Saudi Arabia, which is managed by, Saudi Arabia. I didn't write this down, so I had to look it up. Saudi Arabia says no to Twitter buy. I need to make sure who this is. Yep, Saudi Arabia's Prince Alawad bin Talal rejected Elon's bid to acquire Twitter Inc. for $54.20 a share, saying the deal doesn't come close to the intrinsic value of the social media platform. So this person's part of the Sovereign Wealth Fund, who has a lot of shares himself, is already rejecting the offer. There's other institutional investors that want to see Twitter still be able to make money and make those make things of that. And institutional investors, especially places like Vanguard. Vanguard is an institutional investor who manages pretty much low cost index funds for people, like for their IRAs or 401ks, very low cost. And they typically vote with however the board recommends. So if the board is against it, Vanguard, who now owns more shares than Elon Musk, would also vote against it more than likely. So this is more than likely dead on arrival. And Elon's not a dumb guy. He's not dumb. He's very smart. That's like one of the reasons why people like him so much, is that he's so dang smart, right? And hold on, because I can get a cough. Sorry about that. And he probably knew that. He probably knew that it was dead on arrival. So that leads me to believe that it was more of a troll as well, given that how quickly it came out that these people have said they won't vote for it. And it's also might explain why he was late filing the paperwork to make it. And it might be all an elaborate ploy to drum up support for a new social media company, or for him to simply make some quick bucks while also flipping the bird to Twitter. Because if he dumps his shares on the market, even if he does it in a way that makes him profit, it will cause other share prices to go down. And so there's no real losing here for Elon Musk, regardless of how he does this, because he himself is a market maker. He's driven up the price of Dogecoins. He's driven up the price of several stocks. He's manipulated his own stock value. In fact, he almost was threatened with removal of the board from Tesla due to some of the statements that he made. He bought some more shares of that, of his own stock back, and it's been a mess. And it might also be illegal. So this is going to be very interesting to see what the SEC, the Service Exchange Commission, does with what Elon is proposing to do here. And again, like I said in the short before this, I posted a little short when this was first announced. I don't think he had any intent on ever buying Twitter or serving on the board of directors, because that would limit what he could say. Now, if it goes private, he can say whatever the fuck he wants, right? Without it worrying about nothing, because who cares? He's got fuck you money, right? He's able to suffer a loss if he buys Twitter. But I don't really see this as being his end goal necessarily. But we'll see. We'll know in a few weeks. Again, the deal looks to be dead on arrival. So even if it goes up for a vote, it's likely not to pass due to other strong shareholders being against it. But we'll see. And we'll see what his plan B is that he announced to the Wall Street Journal earlier today as well. So when we know, we'll make sure to update you with the kind of analysis only we provide over here. So again, be on the lookout for that. But we have to continue on with the news roundup, and let's talk about the U.S. economy and what it's going on here. We're going to start with the market. Okay, so we're going to start with the market here, and let's go ahead and get into it. So U.S. retail sales increased solidly in March, boosted by record high gasoline prices. Consumers are starting to feel the pinch of high inflation, with online spending posting back-to-back declines for the first time in more than a year. Today's report from the Consumer Commerce Department, which also showed stronger retail sales growth in February than initially thought, suggested consumer spending picked up in the first quarter, helping to underpin the overall economy. A tightening labor market, which is driving up wages, and massive savings accumulated during the pandemic are providing some cushion against inflation. Now, this is because a lot of people just stopped going out to eat. Well, people went out to eat more, but they start going on like expensive trips and doing stuff. They can only improve your home so much with space, with stuff that you can buy online. And a lot of people are just sitting on a lot of more money than they would normally because they weren't spending it. And then, of course, there was the stimulus checks. So people being able to weather inflation a bit by relying on their savings to make the big purchases that they're making now, homes, cars, what have you. It's going to end up running out of steam eventually, though. All right, and this, all these things are doing a number on inflation numbers, and the annual inflation surged this past month by the most in more than 40 years in of last 40 years. Though there are signs of price pressures having peaked and should start to gradually abate. Month-to-month inflation, so what the media typically reports is year-over-year inflation. The year-over-year inflation rate, let me double check that. I want to say it was 8.5%. Yep, it is 8.5%. But the month-over-month inflation, which is tracking how much prices increased from one month to the next month, so from February to March, showed an increase from 0.8% to 1.5% increase of month-over-month inflation. And it tracks with the increase in gasoline prices and the increase of crude oil prices and the increase of food prices caused, and to a large degree, by Putin's war in Ukraine. So, but let's continue on though. So the report still reveals the resilience of consumer spending, said Tim Kuhlan, a senior economist at Wells Fargo in Charlotte, North Carolina. Continuing on, he said, there is no doubt households are feeling the pinch from skyrocketing prices across an array of products, but there are signs that pandemic-related inflation is beginning to ease. Though gasoline prices have since retreated to an average $4.07 per gallon, high inflation is likely to prevail. A separate report from the Labor Department on Thursday showed import prices jumped 2.6% last month, the largest rise since April of 2011, after increasing 1.6% in February. Also, inflation continued to hit imports, with prices rising 2.6%. Oh, that's same thing. Now, according to economists at Bank of America, the U.S. economic outlook is darkening so rapidly that a recession might be on the horizon, though. In an analyst notes to clients, the Bank of America chief investment strategist, Michael Hartnett, warned that surging consumer prices combining with an increasingly hawkish central bank could participate in an economic downturn in the United States. Quote, inflation shock worsening, rate shock just beginning, recession shock coming, Hartnett wrote. The analysis comes as the Fed takes a more hawkish approach to fight inflation, which is the highest level since 1982. Policymakers raised rates by a quarter percentage point in March and have since signaled support for a faster half percentage point increase at their May meeting. Traders are now pricing in more than an 80% chance of a hefty half-point rate jump when policymakers meet next month. Some economists believe that the Fed waited too long to confront the burst in inflation, while others have expressed concerns that moving too quickly to stabilize prices risks triggering an economic recession. Now, the reason why this is the case, though, so think about it, all right? You have a very hot economy. You have money sloshing around in the economy. People are buying goods and services, prices are going up, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you suddenly yank that chain to pull it back like a barking dog, right? You could fall down. The dog's pulling, you're pulling, you can fall on your ass. And it's a similar thing to how inflation, how rates work. Because if you're not giving enough liquidity to the market to meet all the demands that the market is having, then you cause competition in the market for goods and services. And if you make it too expensive, then people aren't investing as much, and that lack of investment triggers a recession, and that triggers job losses. So that's why a lot of people are really concerned about what the Fed is doing. My own analysis says that I don't see a recession coming, largely due to demographics changes that we've experienced over the last 5 years. And those are largely due to millennials finally coming into age of buying houses and forming families. So, and I've said this a lot on this program. The oldest millennial, depends on how you declare it, right? I personally say millennials are born in 1985 and no sooner, okay? I say that for a number of different reasons. Internet access, how prices of college worked, everything else like that rapidly changed between 2000 and 2004, okay? Web 1.0 kids grew up in Web 1.0, and then they were adults when Web 2.0 came into effect, right? If you were born before 1985, you were an adult when Web 1.0 came into effect, right? Or, you know, in your late teens at the youngest. And you're a full-fledged adult when 2.0 came out, and you're still trying to, you're like a Gen Xer that's like, use Facebook and TikTok, and you're cool and all, right? I'm not knocking you or anything, but you just had a different experience than millennials did if you were born before 1985. And I think that should be acknowledged, right? And so, like, the oldest millennial right now is 36, going on 37. And the youngest millennial, I like to cut off at 97-ish or so, but we can, for simplicity's sake, we can say 2000. The youngest millennial then is turning 22. So you have an age range of 22 to 37. What is happening during those times? Family formation. So every single millennial is in prime family formation age. And that means buying a bunch of shit to provide for kids. You're consolidating with a wife, you're a spouse rather. You're moving into a house, so you need more stuff to fill your house. You're coming into your own in your career, and there's more travel and more things that you have to do. So that means more consuming and spending and things like this. Like, you're no longer a child relying on, you know, your parents to provide for you. You're now an adult providing for yourself and getting all the things that you couldn't get as a child, assuming you're able to and you have means to do so. And those kind of things, those kind of transitions in life really do help the economy. It really does. And I don't think that this is slowing down. Now, home prices probably will slow down a bit as people borrow. Once you get 5, 6, 7, 8% rates on mortgages, it might price more people out of being able to buy a home. So that might tamp down on home prices a bit. It might make it not as good of an investment outlook for investors, so BlackRock and etc. So they might not be buying as much of the market. And so if these pressures come off, house prices might come down a little bit as well. But that isn't to say that the economy is going to go into a severe recession. Recessions happen every 5 to 8 years or so. So we're due for a recession. Assuming that the pandemic recession didn't reset that, right? So we're due for an actual recession. But I don't think it's going to be like 2008, like a lot of fearmongers are saying. I don't think inflation's going to impact this too much, etc. But let's continue on. So even though that higher interest rates tends to create higher rates on consumers and businesses for borrowing money and increased prices, Powell has pushed back against concerns that further tightening by the central bank would trigger a recession, though, and has maintained optimism that the Fed can strike a delicate balance between taming inflation and ensuring that the economy remains stable. Quote, the probability of a recession in the next year is not particularly elevated, Powell told reporters during the Fed's March meeting, citing that the strong labor market, solid payroll growth, and strong business and household balance sheets. This is because savings increased so much, right? So you have and debt went down because people paid off debt. So all signs are that this is a strong economy and one that will be able to flourish in the face of less accommodative monetary policy, which means higher interest rates, which means higher borrowing cost. Now, after growing increasingly pessimistic about the economy through 2022, Americans are suddenly finding some bright spots, though. The University of Michigan's Consumer Sentiment Index unexpectedly rebounded to 65.7% in early April from 59.4% to data, according to data out Thursday morning. Now, that trounced the median forecast of 59% from economists surveyed by Bloomberg. It also marked the first uptick since December of 2021 and the largest one-month improvement since 2013. This could possibly be due to the fact that it's springtime, people are coming out of COVID winter, people think that COVID is done, son. And so we might be getting some more consumer confidence back and people are going out to experience life and stuff like that again. Now the jump was almost certainly, the jump also was almost entirely fueled by rosier outlooks toward the economy's future. Richard Curtin, chief economist at the University of Michigan Surveys of Consumers, said the expectation index rose from rose to 64.1 from 54.3, buoyed by a nearly 30% jump in the year ahead outlook for the US economy. So this, despite the fact that people's fears about inflation are very much real, they are still very much saying that the next year's outlook for the economy is going to be good. Things are going to be growing. We're going to be in boom times, etc. Now, respondents also recorded a 17.2% gain in their personal finance expectation despite soaring inflation. And this could be caused by people's increased paychecks, people getting better jobs. The great resignation the pandemic led people to find their passions and change jobs. I personally found a job that paid me more than my last job after being let go. And so people are feeling good about themselves. When you have money in the bank, gas in the tank, you're going to feel good, right? And that's what people are experiencing right now. They have a little bit more in savings than they would have normally, and so they're feeling good. Now, attitudes toward the present day economy also turned more encouraging, but at a much slower clip. So the index of current economic conditions rose to 68.1% from 67.2%, reflecting a slightly more optimistic view of the recovery as it stands. Now, to be sure, the improvement only snaps a month-long downward streak, and overall sentiment remains lower than almost every other month in the past decade. Inflation remains the biggest drag on Americans' economic mood. Data out Tuesday showed that prices soaring 8.5% in the year through March, reflecting the fastest inflation since 1981. Now, despite the fact that gas prices have fallen from their peak in March, the Russia-Ukraine conflict continues to hold cost at extraordinary high levels. The preliminary April survey offers only a tentative evidence of improved sentiments, and the index is still far from fully recovery, Burton said. It's now too early to say whether the April sentiment data marks an inflection point or not, but it signals that, for now, Americans are looking at the brighter side of the recovery. So, yeah, I think things are going pretty decently. You wouldn't know it from arguing with people online, but I mean, people are feeling good from COVID being gone. You know, people saying the pandemic's over. People are going to be going out, experiencing life again, or at least life more than they were in the last year or so, for more people. And the like, and people with a better amount of savings can weather the inflation, and they're seeing pay increases and stuff like that. So people are feeling a little bit good about the economy, at least right now, but have reservations about where it could go and still very much worried about inflation. But as we go back, as we talk about allergies must be coming back at me. So, but as we were talking about with the Great Resignation, we're also seeing the Great Unionization. And we're going to talk about that now. All right. So we're going to start off with Starbucks. So when Howard Schultz returned as interim CEO to Starbucks earlier this month, his message to Starbucks employees, he calls partners, was, "Trust me to make things right, not unions." Now, the message, though, fell on deaf ears, and unionization at Starbucks has caught on like wildfire. People were drawn to work at Starbucks because the wages and benefits were competitive, the workplace was fun, and the culture was progressive. But when the pandemic hit, the goodwill feelings faded. In January, the Buffalo Starbucks unionized, and that path began looking better and better to employees in Starbucks stores across the country. Union busting became prevalent, with employees who were union supporters being fired, losing promotions, and hours being cut. Then, as the pandemic eased, the franchise phased out COVID benefits in the face of record sales and a CEO pay bump of over 40%. The latest tally of unionized Starbucks shops is 20, and there are more waiting for the vote to join Workers United. This is great news, and we have more great news coming out of Amazon as well. So in more union news, Amazon's Staten Island location was the first in the country to vote to unionize early this month. There were a total of 2,654 votes in favor of joining the American Labor Union, the ALU, and 2,131 opposed. Around 5,000 workers voted in the election out of the possible 8,300 employed at the warehouse. Amazon, a self-proclaimed anti-union company, is already seeking to overturn the victory. Prior to the election, company managers hung up vote no banners and made meetings mandatory for workers where they urged them to reject the ALU. The union has been calling for longer break times, paid sick leave, and higher wages, claiming that the current pay rate of $18.25 is not high enough for living in New York, which is very true. Within a week of the vote, Amazon filed 25 objections to the warehouse win, accusing them of intentionally creating hostile confrontations in front of eligible voters, criticizing their distribution of cannabis, and accused them of improperly polling workers, even though the employers and the union were banned from tracking votes at the time. A leaked list of words that could be banned on an internal employee messaging app limited union positive language, such as the word union itself, I hate, unfair, and rate. It also included phrases that had to do with past and present Amazon controversies like restrooms, calling back to reporters or of workers relieving themselves in bottles, and living wage. So these things are against the national National Labor Board, the NLRB, National Labor Relations Board, NLRB. And it's against these rules and regulations because they want the vote to be as fair as possible. And threatening workers and banning phrases and firing things makes the vote not fair. Now, ALU is planning on holding another union vote at Staten Island's second warehouse location starting on April 25th. In Bessemer, Alabama, more Amazon workers are challenging a 993 to 875 vote opposing unionization, in which over 400 votes remain uncounted. Remaining uncounted. I wonder why. It's probably because Amazon lost that vote too. Now, the National Labor Relations Board, the NLRB, is planning on having a hearing in the upcoming weeks to see whether another historic win could be salvaged from the counted votes. So what does this all mean? This means that labor is making a comeback. Labor unions are making a comeback in the United States. And we're seeing it. And we're seeing it. And we're seeing it come back because of the pandemic, in my opinion. The pandemic reset people's expectations of what is and is not fair pay and fair treatment. People could only take so much bullshit before they rose up and started demanding respect that they deserve. And the pandemic called a lot of people that are essential workers, calling them heroes and all this other stuff. And despite all this reverence for people going to work during the pandemic to help the rest of us live our lives, employees were being repeatedly treated like shit by their employers and customers, from trying to enforce mask wearing on company grounds to not being paid and having wage theft, not being paid enough, experiencing wage theft, tip theft, not being compensated, not being allowed to take sick time, infecting other employees around them with COVID, which is why the ALU came into existence in the first place. It's because one of the leaders was trying to ensure that because he was a supervisor, ensure that his people were protected from catching COVID and being told basically, no, you can't do that. All right. You can't go home. You have to work, despite the fact the assurances that you'd be able to go home and not work, not being paid because of sick time, etc. And it's reset people in such a way that they are demanding that respect. And they're going to get it. And they're going to get it one way or the other. They're going to get it either by us, the consumers, giving it to them, or they're going to demand it from their employers by unionizing, striking, causing slowdowns at work, etc., in order to get the pay and benefits that they need to survive in a modern economy. And since employers and big business in general is very much against giving workers anything, essentially, especially for lower wage workers. Anything. You're seeing them unionize and demanding it and making those getting those concessions through the power of collective action. And we like to see it. Remember, folks, if your boss says you don't need a union, you probably need a fucking union. And that is our update about unions today. Continuing on with the roundup, though, we're going to talk about employment in general. So, initial jobless claims rose to 185,000 for the week ended April 9th, an increase of 18,000 from the previous week and above the estimated 172,000. Continued claims, which run a week behind the headline numbers, fell by 48,000 to 1.475 million. Quote, claims are still at a very low levels, underscoring historically tight labor market conditions, says Nancy Vaden-Houghton, lead U.S. economist at Oxford Economics. Continuing on, she says, we expect initial claims to remain below 200,000 in the weeks ahead, as employers who continue to struggle to attract and retain workers will keep layoffs to a minimum. 2 years after the coronavirus pandemic sent the economy into a brief but devastating recession, American workers are enjoying extraordinary job security. Last year, employers added a record 6.7 million jobs, and they've added an average of 560,000 more each month so far in 2022. The employment rate, which soared to 14.7%. The unemployment rate, which rose to 14.7% in April of 2020 in the depths of the COVID-19 recession, is now at 3.6%, barely above the lowest point in 50 years. And there is a record projection of 1.7 job openings for every unemployed American. Now, despite the inflation surge, persistent supply bottlenecks, damage from COVID-19, and now a war in Europe, employers have added at least 400,000 jobs for 11 straight months. In its report, the government also sharply revised its estimates of hiring in January and February by a combined of 95,000 jobs, which means that there was nearly 100,000 people more hired than what was previously estimated. So average hourly pay also rose a strong 5.6% over the last 12 months. Welcome news for employees across the country, despite the fact that this is still below year-over-year inflation. So it's a larger increase in pay than what has been historically experienced from a year. I think is around 3% or so, but it's still below inflation, which means in a sense it's kind of a pay cut. So you're going to see more people demanding higher pay here shortly. For leisure and hospitality workers, including people who work in hotels, restaurants, and bars, average pay has jumped 11.8% from a year earlier. A clear sign that employers are desperate for staff, said Sarah Jaraman, president of One Fair Wage, which advocates for better paying conditions for service employers. So what does this mean? Well, what this means is that the economy is still strong. People are getting hired. They're being able to go to different jobs, like we said earlier. And the Great Resignation is not slowing the progress of pay and employment. In fact, it might be helping it along and making the economy better and more agile. So despite the fact that we're seeing high inflation, we're seeing high employment and high pay increases, which means that overall the economy might be heated up slightly too much. And that's why we're seeing increased rates coming out of the Fed and inflation, but it's not too much that it's negatively impacting people's ability to make a living. So it sucks. Don't get me wrong. Inflation sucks. Sucks for everybody, especially for people that we're talking about, the lowest paid workers. But they are seeing big gains here above and beyond inflation numbers, with hotel and restaurant staff an average of 11.8%. And so maybe this is just the economy rebalancing itself, and we'll eventually see prices stabilize, hopefully in the next 5 or 6 months. I originally said that, hey, if things continued on their trend that we saw back in I want to say it was December. If things continue, no, not December. It was November, back in November, that we would see the inflation start to slow right around July or so, like noticeable slow inflation. So people would experience, oh, prices are not going up as much, or prices have not gone up at all for certain goods and services. But the war in Ukraine has dampened that, and so we could see that be pushed out until November. If we're going to see, if the war comes to an end soon, or if the economy adjusts and we can get oil to Europe, or we can get more oil produced here, more natural gas produced here or to Europe, etc., bring the prices down a bit, then we could see that happen as soon as November. But we'll see, and when we see, we'll let you all know too. So we like to wrap up the news roundup with some news of the weird, and today we are going to have two stories about some animals. And the first story here is about crabs trading spaces. And it was apparently moving day for hermit crabs. So we're going to watch this video here. It's about 45 seconds, and it's going to be cute.
Maybe it could be both.
Look at that. It's moving day. It's moving day. Time to trade shells. So for people who may not know, crabs often trade shells back and forth. They find new homes. When they get bigger, they have to find bigger shells to reside in, etc. And so humanity managed to actually catch it on video. And it was cute, right? Kind of cute. Look at that. Look at that. Trying to trade shells. So we thought that was a fun little story to bring at you. Another one, though, is this. And this is a weird one, and it's a dangerous one. We're going to talk about it. So this here is what we're looking at, is a blue dragon. And they are washing up on Texas Gulf Coast beaches, and photos show... So blue dragons are washing up on Texas Gulf Coast beaches. Photos show, and while the brightly colored sea creatures may be tempting to touch, odds are good you'd regret it. They're a type of sea slug, and they've been spotted in the sand and surf of Mustang Island State Park, as well as Mission Aransas Reserve near Corpus Christi in recent days. Seasonal wind has driven currents and bringing them ashore, Mustang Island officials have said. These blue dragons rarely grow larger than 3 centimeters long, but they're quite fierce, preying on sea life much larger than themselves and able to deliver painful stings to perceived threats. The Portuguese man-o'-war, a creature that looks like a jellyfish and stings like a jellyfish but is not a jellyfish, is favorite prey for blue dragons, experts say. Not only are they a good source of food, but the dragons also take the man-of-war's venom and use it for their own protection. They concentrate the venom of the man-of-war into little tendrils or fingers on the sides of their bodies, allowing them to retaliate with stings even more painful than a man-of-war's, according to Padre Island National Seashore. Their diet of man-o'-wars and blue button jellies is also the source of the blue dragon's color, which helps them blend into the water. So if you see this thing come up on your beach, don't touch it. You're going to be in for a serious ouchie. But everybody, with that, I am sad to say that we are actually out of time. We know you liked what you heard because you stayed to the end. So go ahead and smash that like button for the algorithms. Hit that follow button. Ring the bell. It really does help us out. We'd like to give special thanks to our Facebook community for topic ideas and to our producer, Nikki Adams, for producing the copy, which we read from today with my own opinion thrown in. We do the news roundup, which is what you just heard now, every Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to roughly about 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, unless stated otherwise. And we're trying to keep to that schedule as closely as we can, despite me being busy. We're also going to be doing, as stated at the top of the program, we're doing another podcast called Cypher State, which is foreign affairs and foreign policy focus. And those will be including panel shows as well as individual shows exploring individual topics on the geopolitical stage, roughly about an hour, and kind of things like that, where we talk to people across the political spectrum. We'll be also doing another podcast starting next month called Praxis Run, which will interview people from across the political spectrum to understand what how they have put their ideas, their philosophy, their ideology into practice, or otherwise known as praxis. And so we hope that we will have you there. So stick around for just a second. We will go in and watch somebody else here. We are going to raid into... we're going to go raid into Hans of Hakir. Hans of Hakir is a pretty decent dude. And yeah, they're streaming right now with 33 people. So I hope you enjoy. And as always, as we like to say at Crowdsource Politics, keep your head up through the political storm.